What's up, losers? Today I'm back with another video reading and responding to fat acceptance posts from r/fatlogic. This is episode 23. Brilliant. I'm sure you're all dying to see what ridiculous takes the fat activists have conjured up this time. So I'll not keep you waiting any longer. Let's get into it.
If fat people were allowed to exist in their full humanity, it would rob thinness of its meaning and power. Thus, any attempt to bring this about is deeply threatening to anyone who relies on thinness, even just the hope of it, to give them meaning and social power. Anyone who adores, worships, and draws life and breath from the unequal distribution and exertion of social and political power will despise the existence of fat politics and other liberation projects as well. They will be particularly stressed and angry when we expose the shared root of different forms of subjugation. Hence the absolute screaming temper tantrums that occur if you mention white supremacy while discussing anti-fatness, despite compelling scholarship connecting the two. It rattles the foundation of the entire power structure that gives their life meaning, which I intend to keep doing it as much as possible, not only because it is deeply important to me, but because it is the most intoxicating pleasure, and extremely fun. I barely know anything, and I have so much reading to do. But I know just enough to make people with shitty values consistently angry. I spent a long time being scared. So scared I wanted to bury myself in the bowels of some hospital. And just never speak up again. So glad I didn't.
Holy moly, that was intense. I feel like I just read the Communist Manifesto of fatness or something. What a wild ride. There's a lot to unpack here. So I guess I'll just get straight into my observations and criticism. Starting from the top, I find the bit about fat people existing in their full humanity pretty weird. I'm not sure if it means that fat people are deprived of their full humanity by fatphobia, or if it means that fat people need to be fat to maintain their full humanity. If it's the former, it's a wildly over-dramatic take that greatly overstates the extent to which fat people are artificially disadvantaged in society. Like, you're not being deprived of humanity because there aren't enough plus-size clothes in your favorite store. Get a grip. And if it's the latter, i.e. claiming that remaining fat is a requirement for fat people to experience their full humanity, which is how I initially interpreted it. Well, it sounds like something out of a bizarre cult pamphlet, if I'm being honest. Like, it's genuinely pretty strange to think of fat as somehow being a spiritually necessary part of someone. And, by extension, thinking that someone would somehow be less human if they lost weight. To any normal person, there's nothing holy or mystical about fat. It's just fat. But to a select group of fat acceptance advocates, it seems to have taken on this quasi-religious status, as the vessel of human goodness or something. And yeah, that really squizzes me out. Next up she talks about how thin people are scared, shook, even, by fat politics, because it is robbing them of the thing that gives them meaning and power: their thinness. I've got to say that this is a pretty outlandish take, and it's one that I can only see being formed out of deep insecurity and prolonged immersion in the stifling air of the fat acceptance echo chamber. Because it certainly can't have been formed out of, actually talking to thin people. Like, in what world do thin people draw the meaning in their lives from the mere fact that they're thin? That would be totally pathetic LMAO, if anyone is drawing meaning from their body size. It's you with the full humanity BS, haha. But contrary to popular belief, most thin people actually have lives, and are not constantly admiring themselves in the mirror and applauding themselves for not being fat. Honestly, the fact that you think thin people are like this says more about you than it does about thin people. I also fail to see how thin people wield power in society on the basis of their thinness. I suppose thin people might benefit from being generally considered more attractive, But this is still more a matter of pretty privilege than thin privilege. No matter how thin you are. If you're ugly, nobody is going to care. It's not like presidential elections are being decided based on who has the lower BMI/LMAO. And if what's actually being referred to is the stuff about chairs being too small and not enough XXXXXXXL clothes being on the shelves. Yeah, I'm sorry, but that stuff is way too frivolous for me to consider it some oppressive monopolization of power by thin people. I just can't bring myself to take it seriously. If that makes me some horrible fat phobe, so be it. As for the middle section about how supposedly angry, scared, and threatened thin people feel about fat politics, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to bring you back down to earth just a little. And it's probably going to be a little depressing. For starters, most thin people have probably never heard of fat politics. Or if they have only the faintest impression of what it might be. Probably because they heard someone make a joke about it one time. Of the thin people who are aware of fat politics, the vast majority see it as nothing more than a joke, a source of entertainment and nothing more. They are not threatened by you. They are not scared of you. They are not even angry at you. They just like to laugh at you. There are those thin people who go along with, and at least publicly support fat acceptance and its principles. I can't imagine why, but different strokes, I guess. But those people aren't intimidated by fat acceptance either, because they're on board with it. All of this means that, sadly, the terrified thin person, who is lashing out at fat activists as they watch their world of status and power crumble before their eyes, simply doesn't exist, except maybe in your fanfics. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. That's the bulk of my response to this post out of the way. So I just have two more minor comments to tack on at the end here. Number 1. Is engaging in fat activism online really the quote, most intoxicating pleasure to you? Once again, different strokes, I guess, but that seems like a pretty strange thing to get such enjoyment out of. Have you ever tried, I don't know, getting a real hobby? Just a thought. And number 2, what does she mean by saying that? She was scared enough to bury herself in the bowels of some hospital. Like, not even joking here. I have no idea what this is being said in reference to. Either way, it's just about as weird as everything else in this post, haha.
280 isn't even that big. Flaps. Jesus freaking Christ, dude, I can't.
Who are you people, and what do you look like? I'm 6'7", and I don't even weigh 280.
The point is, that 280 is huge, especially for a woman. Whether it's good or bad, you are just lying when you say it isn't big.
I said 280 is not that big. 280 does not constitute having flaps. Stop twisting my words. What he said was freaking gross, and I'm not here for it.
I mean, it 100% does consist of having flaps and fat, unless you are in the small percentage of female bodybuilders.
Her, 5'8" and 280. I wore size 18/20. And size 16 is like an average size woman. It just depends how you carry weight. I'm 350 now and still look great.
280 is massive for an average height woman. Haha, I love posts like this where you get to see responses from normal people. And they're straight up not having it LMAO. But yeah, in what world is 280 pounds not that big? I can't even imagine being that size. I'm absolutely certain that any woman that size would have some kind of flaps and visible excess body fat. So I don't know why she's so outraged over the suggestion. And I don't know who she thinks she is kidding by denying it. I have no desire to unnecessarily mock fat bodies for the sake of entertainment. Because that's just cruel and unproductive. Not to mention that it fails to differentiate between fat acceptance advocates and regular fat people. Well, I only have a problem with the former group, but I do think it's fair game to point out obvious BS like this. Even when it concerns aspects of body image that people might be self-conscious about. Weight is not some black box that can only be uncovered by getting someone onto a scale. You wear your weight, and this only becomes more visible the heavier you get. Nobody is going to mistake a 140-pound woman for a 280-pound one. Because they just look different in a bunch of ways. And one of the clearest of these differences is the inevitable presence of rolls and flaps of fat on the heavier woman. Getting upset and attacking people for noticing the obvious is not going to change that. What I find especially concerning about all of this is how it shifts the goalposts of what can be considered big, and normalizes increasingly massive body sizes as it goes. Even in this post, you get the second woman coming in and taking the premise that 280 is not that big, only to build on it and say that actually, even 350 is not that big, and she looks great at that size, because it's all about how you carry the weight. Which, I'm sorry but no, there is no way for anyone to carry 350 pounds of weight healthily. Or without outwardly appearing enormously fat. You are kidding yourself. I think the reason this works the way it does is because despite their claims of fat acceptance, none of these people actually want to think of themselves as big. So they're incentivized to agree with those who are even bigger than they are. And validate them in the delusional belief that they are not that big, because it makes them look smaller by comparison. What this results in is a situation where people get more and more fat. And the fatter they get, the more they retreat into these fat spaces, where there is always someone fatter than them. And, reassured that there is nothing wrong with their size, they then proceed to get fatter once more. And so the cycle repeats. It's kinda terrifying, if I'm being honest. Like, anytime you've got people unironically saying that 350 pounds is not that fat. You know, things have gotten way out of hand. I could keep dwelling on this even longer, but I think it might break my brain and convince me to go on a year-long junk food bender. So I'm going to move on to the next post before that happens, haha.
To be honest, Redacted has radicalized me. I have been fat for a long time, but it's only been a few years since I've acknowledged it as part of my identity. As a critic, a lot of that has meant re-evaluating media that I loved, or recognizing fat phobia in ways that I didn't before. It's a lot.
This one just makes me sad to hear that fat acceptance propaganda has convinced this person to give up on ever losing weight and accept fatness as part of their identity. Is really dispiriting, and frankly alarming, because I'm sure this is not an isolated case. As much as we might laugh at fat acceptance and consider it a fringe community with minimal influence, stuff like this shows that it really does convert some people, convincing them that losing weight is impossible, and that being fat is just who they are, which ultimately becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I guess all we can do is continue the fight against the fatalism and misinformation that fat acceptance promotes. Understanding, and reluctantly accepting, that despite our best efforts, we won't be able to bring everyone back, as much of a downer as that might be. Well, that's all I've got for you today. In spite of that rather somber ending, I hope you enjoyed today's posts and my responses. What do you think? Is 280 pounds not that big? What about 350? Is fat activism really the most intoxicating pleasure? Let me know in the comments. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, or I'll point out all the fat phobia in your favorite pieces of media. and you won't be able to enjoy them anymore. Just kidding, haha. Anyway, catch you later.